Oh, from our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip from Gantom Lighting Controls. That is Scott Swenson from Scott Swenson Creative Development. And on Green Tagged, we look at the top news each week and try and explain why it matters to business professionals. And this week, we are discussing Comcast earnings. This has been the biggest news of the week because for the first time ever, Comcast Parks Division crossed the $1 billion in quarterly EBITDA ever. So that is what drew all the attention, and that's what all the focus was on, I think, in our little corner of the theme park space, is because everybody was excited about the Comcast and Universal theme parks hitting that revenue standpoint, which is great. I think a lot of people were talking about the success of Epic Universe and how well that's been going. You know what, Scott, though? I don't think that's actually the real story.
Well, so you're the one who's always been really good at I always think of me as the conspiracy theory guy, but I'm really not. You're the one who always has these alternative takes as the deeper you dig into the facts. So what do you think the real story is, Philip?
I think the real story is the hotels. And I think that the real story is that this is proof that Universal's hypothesis that they could create a Disney-esque flywheel is working. I don't think this is really about Epic. I think Epic, maybe was the thing that pushed it over or any of that kind of stuff. But the thing to me that popped out here, there's a few things. One is that Epic is still not operating at the capacity. And now they keep pushing it back, right? It's like they use the distraction technique. Distraction, $1 billion this quarter. And then, they whisper to the side, but yeah, we're not going to be at full capacity for a few more months. Maybe end of 2026, maybe, they keep delaying when it's actually going to be operational. But that kind of doesn't matter, because to me, the biggest thing here was the hotels. Like, these hotel numbers are insane. So they added 2,000 hotel rooms. The average daily rate was up 20%, and the occupancy was up 3%. So it almost like defies regular economic theory, right? Because they added a bunch of supply, but also prices went up, right? It wasn't like
that's to meet the new perceived demand of Epic.
That's right. But I think that the thing is, that's, I think, where the real value got captured. I think that's my point, is that the Epic was the catalyst. So it's not to say it's not important. It's critical, but it was critical in not just as Epic as a standalone. It was critical in that it has proven that Universal can create a flywheel, because now they have the hotels, then they have the centerpiece. Now it's not become, we're here for Disney for a week and one day for Universal. You can see now where guests could come just for Universal and spend their whole time in the Universal bubble, which is what they've been trying to, I think that's been the grand strategy, for Universal for a long time. But the question was still out as to whether it was going to actually work.
I think that's the real, the real story, is that Epic in and of itself, because again, it does have its challenges, but it's still getting great press, and there's still some amazing things there, blah, 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 blah. But I think more than anything, it is it's the tipping point. We've hit the tipping point now, where when you've got 4 attractions, when you've got 4 parks, then you can spend a week at Universal. I think it's just critical mass. Epic Universe hit critical mass. So it's just like when I was a kid, and we used to go to Walt Disney World. It was you'd plan a day at one park, a day at another park, a day at the hotel, and this is back before there were all the parks that were at Disney. But once they hit 4 parks, then all of a sudden everything just skyrocketed. That is the critical mass and the tipping point, and that's why the hotels, they needed more hotels, and it's something that, quite honestly, they learned from Disney. It's why they needed the more hotels. It's why the people are going to these hotels. It's like, for example, I don't know whether have you stayed at or seen Stella Nova or Terra Luna?
It's too expensive for me. I've seen them though. I've done the cheap version where I pretend to be staying at the hotel so I could walk around.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time. But the other side of it though is they're not. Those two are not in an immersive, environment. They're not like the Universal
Elio.
Studios or the
Yeah.
IOA properties. They're, right off of, honestly, not too far from my drive. They're right, just kind of hotels. They're nice hotels apparently, but the idea is that once you can say you're going to take a week-long family vacation and you're going to spend your entire week doing stuff at Universal, that's when the hotels become viable. If you're going to try to stay, if you say there's really only about enough to do for 3 days here, people are going to stay at Disney and take 2 days, 3 days to go to Universal. But once you say there's enough for 4 things to do, because your first day is usually checking out the hotel. If you've got kids, the pool, playing in the pool. That happens with every vacation. It's so much fun to watch families because the kids will be like, they'll be at some great theme park and go, when can we go back to the hotel and play in the pool? So, parents have to arrange for that. They have to arrange for that time. And I think that that Epic, being the 4th park, hit the critical mass and made it so that there was enough to do for a full week. So therefore, we need more hotels if we're going to capture all of that money.
Yep, that's right. And I think this also, what it did, all this together, the critical mass, as you mentioned, I think it also kind of waylaid or it dissolved some of the fears that Wall Street had, because a lot of the fears some of the analysts had was that the Epic would be just stealing guests from islands or from Universal Florida. And I think it proves the opposite here, is that it, like you said, it was the catalyst that made the critical mass jump. It was not something that's going to be just stealing guests. And you can see that because, they still haven't done the worked it into the annual passes and all this kind of stuff. And so it really is just serving on its own ground. The theme park quarterly revenue jumped 22% and EBITDA grew 24%. So it's doing what we're saying, and which is, I think, making some of the analysts, we'll talk about a little bit more how that could be a dangerous thing, because I think now some of the analysts are suggesting that the parks division is doing so well that it would make sense for them to split off and it to be a separate company, which that's the risk when you do too well, is that now people are saying you shouldn't be part of this dying media company, basically.
Yeah, I'm not. I have very, very mixed feelings in regards to that, but that's a whole nother story. I think part of the reason that the analysts were so hesitant about this is because, those of you who have not been to Orlando to actually see where these parks are, I think the analysts' big concern was you have to leave property in order to go to the other property.
Yep, that's right.
And that they were going to get distracted or waylaid as they went from, if they were staying in one of the studios hotels and they had to get to Epic, you actually have to leave Universal property in order to get to the other Universal property. Now, I don't know. I'm assuming that the hotels are providing transportation. I'm assuming that the hotels are making it so that, we will lock you in this vehicle and not let you out until we get you to our other property, so that every dime you spend goes into our pockets. I would assume that that's happening. But, I think that was one of the big concerns. That was one of my big concerns from a business standpoint is, wait a minute, you're basically creating 2 separate park locations that could conceivably compete with one another. And I will say that what I've heard, and again, this is speculation, but what I've heard other people speculate about is that, part of the reason that the Epic Universe parking lot is a big flat parking lot is because eventually they're going to build another City Walk or something along those lines there, and then build a parking garage. But they didn't want to do that before opening Epic. They wanted to open Epic, earn some money back. So now, as the two entities grow, or as the second entity, that we'll call it the Epic entity, as it grows, then they may start to compete with one another if they don't make it really easy for the guests to get from one to the other.
Yeah. Reduce friction.
Friction.
Well, on that point, they didn't really. I think to what you just said, I think that a lot of the people in our space, again, our theme park realm, we're expecting them to talk about that, how they're going to reduce friction, or what they were going to expand, or how they were going to, upgrade, whatever their expansion plans, or something about what they were going to do next for Epic. And they actually don't plan on doing any of that. I mean, they they were pretty clear, and whether or not it's because the expanding ride throughput is still their main focus, or I don't. But basically, they kind of made it clear that they are going to be concentrating on their diversification strategy that we've talked about like so much. Where right now Epic, they're just focusing on getting the throughput fixed, but they're looking at the Texas Universal Kids Park that she'll be opening, plus the breaking ground in the UK, and then of course the coasters coming to Hollywood and Orlando. So that's really, they mentioned those. So they kind of were like, we're not really going to be focusing on too much of the expansion or any of this type of thing yet. So it sounds like, I think people were expecting an answer to what you're saying, but it seems like they're trying to fix the bottleneck thing first there for the capacity and operations before, and then work on their diversification strategy.
Right. I think that's a very smart thing to do. There's also the rumors that we've seen about, the new the new ride already coming, breaking ground for, at Epic.
Yep.
We've seen the stories of permits have been pulled and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
So, there's a possibility that there's going to be expansion there, but I think you're right. I think the biggest thing that they're going to focus on now, simply because, again, when the park opened, there was such negativity about it, and that negativity honestly continues. There's not a day goes by where I don't see something come across one of my social media feeds where somebody will be asking, is Epic really worth it if I get a front of line pass, because I don't want to wait 3 hours for a line, for an experience that's going to break down four times in the 3 hours. So
the guest experience probably needs to be improved before they start putting more guests there, is what I think you're saying.
Yes, and I think they're kind of going on parallel paths. I think they're trying to get their rides up and running consistently so that they can manage the attractions that they have. Plus, if they can add one more big crowd suck, so to speak, it might make guests feel as though their day was more worthwhile.
Yep. Well, I agree with all of that. I think, to me, the other big thing besides the hotels, because to me that was, maybe I'm just biased because from my background in hotels and having worked at Disney hotels, but gotten my degree in hotel management. I mean, like, I have a lot of hotel background, but the other big thing that struck me here was we're so focused on the theme park division. I looked at the numbers for the rest of the company, and actually Comcast is not doing well writ large. And I think that's why some of the, maybe some of the analysts are kind of like, it would make more sense. Like the Bank of America analyst specifically kind of pushed a little bit about how there's a conglomerate discount going on, meaning that like they Wall Street likes the parks, but they don't like that they're hidden inside a cable company, because that cable company is not doing well. And so what's happening now is that the parks are distracting from, like, they're spectacularly masking the decline in the main company. If you look at the company as a whole, their revenue is flat, their adjusted EBITDA is down, their EPS is down. If you look at their connectivity, the revenue is down 2%, adjusted EBITDA is down 4.5%. They lost 181,000 broadband subscribers in Q4. And this is despite massive investments they've been doing to try and keep those subscribers. So, like, if we zoom out and look at the thing as a whole, it's not doing great. It's not doing terribly, but it's not doing great. And I think what this underscores is the same thing that we talked about last time we did a deep dive in their earnings is still true now, in that the reason they're trying to go so fast, and probably also the reason they're diversifying so quickly, and like I guess the reason we're seeing some of the breaks here and the friction in the guest experience is because they don't have time to really like make it a Disney level type of thing. They have to like move fast and break things. Like, they have to diversify quickly because the time clock here is the amount of deterioration still happening in their core business.
Well, I agree with you. I think that is part of it. I also think, I mean, just looking at having worked for, major corporations and still consulting with major corporations, stockholders are much more eager to approve spending money where they're making profit. So I think that's also
right.
why the diversification is happening. I think that's also why, the family park in Texas, the UK park, the Universal Universal Monsters thing in Vegas. I mean, I think they're looking, the stockholders looking at it going, well, I don't think we need to spend any more money on trying to get new subscribers, new streaming subscribers, because that's just like, putting a cork in a massive hole in a sinking ship. There's no point there. Let's shoot where the ducks are flying. Let's make our money where we're proving that we can make money. So I think that's part of it.
But they also have to go fast. That's part of it, but the speed is still I guess what I'm saying is I think that explains a little bit about why some of because the pace they're doing here is a lot, and I think part of the reason behind the pacing is that it's still a time clock basically.
So let's look at this,
or just be okay being a smaller company. I mean, I don't know. That's always my question. Like, we would just be a smaller company, but shareholders don't want to hear that. I get it.
Right. But let's just look at this analyst thing. What if they were to break off the theme park entity to become their own company? What are the
Universal Destinations Experiences? Yeah.
What are the negatives to that? Because as a stockholder, my guess is as a stockholder, you would then have stock in both Comcast and Universal Destinations.
Yeah, my understanding is generally those types of deals are actually better for the stockholders because the multiple would be treated higher at the theme park company. But the reason that they usually don't want to do it is the resistance in the board because CEO compensation is tied to the overall size of the company. So if they had to get a new, right? So like then all these CEOs would take pay cuts because they're going to be doing, especially whoever's left with Comcast, their pay cut would be huge because it's on its own, it would be not a great business. And then they'd have to hire a different person for the parks and destinations. But that's my understanding is it's more to do with some of the politics on that. But I'm sure our listeners probably will know about what's possible and what's not from a legal standpoint and the dual class shareholders versus not and all that kind of stuff. But that's my baseline understanding. And don't not financial advice.
Yeah, not. I am not a financial expert. I do not claim to be a financial expert. The other thing that I often wonder too is, because I've seen this happen in other companies when the company was formed to be one thing, and then something else happens that starts to overshadow the original intent of the company. But there are enough people that usually dig their heels in the original company to say, no, we'll take that money for the time being. We will take that and we will invest it so that the purpose of this company will continue to be what we set it out to be. And that's the politics that I think you're talking about. We're going to dig our heels in because we believe this to be right. Quite honestly, I think that's kind of what happened with Anheuser-Busch, and I'm not just with the theme park side of it, but even with the beer side of it. They were so locked into here's what we've always done, here's what we've always had success with, that they weren't willing or able to shift and move. And I think this could be potentially the same challenge, is that Comcast could discover that the original Comcast company is actually become an anchor around the neck of Universal Destinations. I never thought I'd be saying that. I always thought it would be the opposite. We always thought it, like even Disney. Disney was like the whole reason they did the parks was to advertise the movies. That was the whole purpose of it. And boy, has that.
Yeah, but they've done a good job in pivoting. And same with Netflix too. They've all done good jobs in really pivoting, reorienting, it from a whole brand perspective. But yeah, speaking of Disney and Netflix and all that, that is another element here that was brought up, but they seem to dodge around was the whole, who's going to buy Warner Brothers and that whole thing. And as far as I understand, we haven't talked about this in weeks, but Netflix it's like Paramount tried to sue and launched a direct bid to people, and then it's Warner Brothers, they were like, no, you guys are crazy. And then and then there was a personal guarantee from Ellison, from the dad. And then on the Netflix side, to counter all that, Netflix moved to like a mostly cash offer. And so it seems like I have no idea. People are still on the fence where everyone's like, oh, what's going to happen? But you know what we know is like Comcast is nowhere in this discussion. Like it seems to be like it's really just the two players for Warner Brothers, and so Comcast is still not in the discussions anywhere. So that was brought up, but they kind of dodged around it because it seems like that's not a priority for them. Clearly, the priority is diversifying their physical experiences. The only other random Easter egg thing that has to do with IP came from when they were talking about the Yellowstone and how they are doing a long-term partnership with them, which is interesting because Yellowstone is, I think it's more of a like that IP, from Peacock, it's more of like an older demographic, if I understand it correctly. So it's interesting where it's like maybe they're starting to think about potentially shifting some I don't know, whatever, because they have the kids thing, right? And they have the horror. And so it seems like they're almost trying to stratify, their areas into different target markets.
Which I've, again, not being a true business analyst, but something that I've always suggested is what demographic is not being covered. Let's not compete directly with somebody who's already mastered that demographic. Let's find a demo that's not being covered. And I think that's honestly, I think that's why Universal has had such a success to begin with, because they recognized Disney kind of owns the family friendly. So let's be the bad boys of theme park. Let's hit that next demographic. And now they've kind of gone back and forth finding that location. And now Universal feels confident or powerful or wealthy enough, pick one, to all of a sudden say, well, we can go into the kid market, but let's not do it in California or Florida. Let's do it in Texas.
That's right. And let's see, I think the only last thing there was an interesting story that came out in the BBC this week concerning Universal's plan there. Because of course, on the earnings call, they're like, we're breaking ground this year and we're moving fast and all these crazy things. And then there's this story that comes out in the BBC about, of all things, the sewage plans for Universal. And basically it's the BBC interviewed all the people that run the sewage in the local town and everything. And basically, they're like, Universal hasn't really talked to us yet about their plan to do this. And the guy is like, I just think this is really funny where here it says, BBC says that they're optimistic that the works will be ready for Universal to open, but the sewage plans still need firming up and will need to be sped through the regulatory process because it's something that usually takes multiple years and they'll need to do it in a few weeks. And it's just funny because that kind of illustrates this whole thing, right? Where it's not, and they did say, the sewage people were like, yeah, Universal's gonna have to pay their fair share of the development costs in order to get this to be happening on time. And that it's just basically like there's just no way that what they have currently set up is not going to operate with the extra capacity in that region, and that they don't want it to compromise the natural river they have in the area. So they don't want to just dump it into that, and that this is normally a process that takes years and years and years. And if they're going to do this groundbreaking coming up, they're going to have to figure it out in a few weeks. And it's going to take a lot of money to like make this work and a lot of cooperation. And Universal refused to comment to BBC, and apparently they haven't talked to these people. And I was like, these are the cracks, right? When you're having to move that fast. I mean, I'm not saying they're not going to do it. I'm just saying it's just fascinating. This is like a microcosm of this times 1,000, right?
The devil's in the details.
That's right.
And that's always the case with any new park. An example from many years ago. I don't know whether you remember or not when Disney was working very diligently to build a park in Virginia. They wanted very badly. They were starting to, just like they did in Florida, they had a separate company that was buying up land, but what they never took into consideration was although none of the land that they had purchased was considered battlefield land or historic land of historic relevance. What they didn't take into consideration is somebody came up with a study that showed with the additional tourism, the additional cars, the additional people, the additional attendance in the area, that the battlegrounds would be at risk. The historic battlegrounds would be at risk. And Disney was never able to come up with an actual plan that apparently made sense with their financial overview of the project to help compensate for that. And that's why the Disney park never happened. It was supposed to happen just outside of, it was not too far from Williamsburg. And the only reason I know that is because I was living in Williamsburg, Virginia at the time. And it was all going to be an Americana themed park, and it made total sense. It made total sense to be in that location. But what they didn't take into consideration was the federally protected historic land that, they said, well, we don't have any of the historic land. And they said, yes, but the additional emissions from all of the cars that are going to come to populate this park are going to deteriorate this land significantly faster than it's currently going down. So, so it could be anything from emissions from cars to sewage that can put, I won't say stop. I'm not going to say stop, but can slow down or put the brakes on. And I think this is really important, even if you're not a Disney or a Universal. Make sure, you've heard us say 1,000 times, make sure that you address creature comfort. But I'm also going to say, make sure that you address the real world too. Because your park, or even your smaller facility, any expansion you make is going to impact those around you. So make sure that you've done your homework. Make sure that you cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So that you won't run into some surprise in the future. Some of my clients have run into things like, if we put this new XYZ in, we will be covering all of this green space with concrete, and drainage became an issue. So they had to come up with a whole new way, because concrete or blacktop does not soak in water. It all just runs off to somewhere else. They had not planned where that somewhere else was going to be, or how it was going to get there. So, make sure, and I know this sounds really basic, but you'd be surprised. Even very large companies with very large projects don't take this into consideration at the beginning. They kind of kick the can down the road until they have to deal with it, and then it ends up costing them a lot of money, which is fine if you're a Universal or a Disney, but it's not fine if you are a smaller or an independent attraction.
Well, I think, why do you think that's the case? Because I was thinking about this, where we've talked about Epic Universe a lot.
When they're pitching new parks, or when they're pitching expansions, they're going to talk about new roller coasters, new this, new that, new fun stuff. They're never going to pitch. Now with better storm drains. That's never going to be part of the pitch to the powers that be. They get so excited.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. I guess I just think that, like, at this point, it's like such a meme, right? That, like, Disney goes so slow and Universal's doing all these crazy things. And I'm like, we don't know they're all going to work out. Fine, whatever. Epic is great. But again, you see these little things, like the ride capacity and these little things with all these little details. And I think that that's exactly what you're saying. It's like, it's almost like they're moving too fast out of necessity, but they don't really have the time for the details. And hopefully the details will just work themselves out eventually. Like with the ride capacity, eventually it'll get there and it'll be all great. And the sewage, hopefully it'll work out. But I think it's one of those, it's just a different approach. Like Universal's is like, or it's like Disney is like, everything has to be planned from inception. And then Universal's is like, we'll just figure it out. And again, hopefully it'll be fine.
Well, and quite often what will happen in those projects, like the Universal projects, they'll get enough support and enough enthusiasm behind them that they won't mind that they're going to have to spend 3 times as much to get sewage. They won't mind that. But it always, and that's fine for Universal. It's fine for Disney. It's fine for the larger corporations of parks. But the purpose of our show is to always let other people in other levels of attractions know, just keep that in mind as you're planning, because your pockets are not as deep as a Universal or a Disney. So just make sure that you don't get stuck trying to figure out where does this wastewater go. Speaking of wastewater going away, this is the end of our show. So, that's the worst transition I've done in how many years have we done the show? Worst transition ever. But the show, our time's up. So before we say goodbye, of course, we have to say, please subscribe on YouTube. I know you're getting sick of that.
We're so close to 1,000. That's all we need.
I know. And someday, I'll tell you what, when we hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, when we surpass that 1,000 mark, I promise we will not end every show saying, please subscribe for a month. And then we'll bring it back again. But anyway, thank you guys.
Care beyond 1,000. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. And on behalf of Philip Hernandez with Gantom Lighting and Controls, and myself, Scott Swenson with Scott Swenson Creative Development, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we will see you next week.